So this is CJ Baker, and this is the ongoing history of protest music. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm part of a music community where we do different deep dives. So I recently did a deep dive for 1974. So in connection with that deep dive, I listened to 183 albums. And this video is going to focus on my top 25 albums. So initially, my goal was to listen to 200, but I ended up gassing out. So, of course, listening to music's supposed to be enjoyable. So, once something becomes a chore, it makes sense that you just stop doing it. But yeah, the last deep dive I did, which I posted videos on, was 1994. And overall, I did connect to 1994 a bit more than 74. And a lot of that was the nostalgia bump. Like I experienced many of the albums in real time where with 1974, I wasn't even born yet. But one thing I will say is this 1974 top 25 album list, it's more diverse, interesting, and I'll even say weird. So we'll get right into the top 25 albums. And within the next few days, I'll also be posting a video for the top 25 songs. And as I've done with previous deep dives, I'll be posting videos about the top 10 protest songs and protest albums. So the first album on my top 25 list, number 25, it's by Black Heat, and the album is No Time to Burn. So the really cool thing about these deep dives is the new discoveries. And this was a really cool new discovery. So I can't find a whole lot of information on the band or the album online. So this is somewhat of an obscure pick, but it's like really funky and there's a definite grittiness to it and edginess. The album also features several tunes that feature incisive social commentary, which well express the racial relations at that time period. But the album isn't all serious. It's also balanced out with fun, playful tunes. Like, for example, one of those fun, playful, catchy tunes is going to be featured on my top 25 song list. So we'll now get into album 24. It's by Richard and Linda Thompson. I want to see the bright lights tonight. So this album, it's a solid mix of folk and rock influences, and it features some superb guitar work by Richard. But I also love the vocal interplay of Richard and Linda, and I also appreciate the moody or music arrangements which add drama to the introspective and at time darker lyrical content. So we'll move on to our next album, number 23. It's by Millie Jackson, Caught Up. So this is an ambitious R&B concept album, and it's about a woman having an affair with a married man. So side A is from the perspective of the mistress, while side B is from the wife's perspective. So it features a mix of Jackson's emotive vocals and raunchy spoken word. So those two elements combined helps thematically or thematically tie everything together. So yeah, at times concept albums can become a bit convoluted, but this album succeeds because it explores complex but relatable human emotions through the telling of a simple story. So number 22, and this is going to be the first of the 4.5 star albums, And this is also going to be the point where this list starts to get a little bit weird. So the album's by Louie Louie, Touchy. So this is a lo-fi DIY self-released album that initially only sold 25 copies, but since then it's been re-released and has found a following with fans of outsider music. So the album's concept is that people have lost human contact, and to help rectify that, Louie Louie's come up with a new dance called the Touchy, and this dance encourages human contact in order to help bring people together. So Louis, he plays all the instruments, and he is a fairly competent musician, but the song's all repetitive, and at face value, I mean, they're not great. But what remakes the album is the spoken word intro. And even though they're not meant to be funny, I really get a kick out of them, and it makes me really happy. But despite the quirks, Louis does seem to be sincere in his intent. And I think it's that sincerity and genuineness that adds to the album as well. But it is one of those albums where it is tough to know how to rate and rank it. But out of all the albums I listened to in 1974, this really is the one that brought me the most joy. And I even re-listened to it a few more times to see if the novelty would wear off. But every time I listen to it, it still makes me really happy. So this is definitely one of my happy place albums. So album number 21, it's by Tuca, Dracula, I Love You. So this is another new discovery on my list. And I fairly recently, I'd say within the past year, been getting into MPB. So MPB basically translates into Brazilian popular music. So even though popular music is in the title, MPB is definitely more eclectic and adventurous than American pop music. So Tuca does seem to have a relatively low profile, but based on the limited research that I've done, she has had some success as a musician, songwriter, and arranger. Like, for example, she most notably worked with the internationally successful French singer Françoise Hardy. So this particular album, it's a fine display of her ability as both a musician and an arranger, and the production is first rate. And even by MPB standards, the music is genre bending. So the aspect of the album that stands out the most to me is the aspect that potentially we could be an acquired taste for people, and that's the vocals. So vocals is definitely quirky, but they have a certain power to it at the same time. So, of course, I don't know what he's saying because I don't speak Portuguese, and I guess I could look up the lyrics, but I kind of like the mystique of not knowing and kind of leave it a little bit up to the imagination to come up with my own interpretation. But based on the limited research I did, apparently Tuca had a crush on a woman in a heterosexual relationship. So maybe that attraction, like wanting something that you can't have, maybe that sucked the life out of her. But whatever she's singing, I definitely believe her. So we'll get into album number 20. It's by Toots and the Maytals, and the album is In the Dark. So 1974 was a really good year for reggae, and this is the first of 3 reggae albums that made my list. So this album, it features everything that I want in a reggae album. It has the irresistible grooves, and it has many tunes that feature positive, socially conscious lyrics. But also, you can make the argument for Toots being the most soulful reggae vocalist. So there are moments on the album where Toots, he borders on full on R&B crooner mode. But yes, fantastic album. So album number 19, it's by Graham Parsons, Grievous Angel. So this album, it does border on a bit too trainy for my personal taste, but when everything else about it is just so gorgeous, I can forgive the twanginess. So the lyrics and vocals all impeccably married together to create a haunting, emotional listening experience. And then, of course, you also have the angelic vocals of Emmylou Harris. And the way that Emmylou and Graham harmonize, it's a true thing of beauty. So album number 18 is by Frank Zappa, and the album is Apostrophe. So we're gonna follow a goddamn gorgeous album with some batshit craziness. So as previously highlighted, my 1974 list does get crazy at times, and Frank Zappa is a demented musical genius. For example, the album opens up insanely strong with the forceful songs that make up the zany Don't Eat the Yellow Snow suite. And I'm going to discuss that a bit more on the song list. But the rest of the album is solid as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of it is absurdist humor. But Zappa's also, he adds elements of social commentary. So there's a bit of an emotional depth with Uncle Remus, which almost comes across at a place on the album, but it's a really powerful anti-racism protest too. So it does provide a bit of a reprieve from the rockiness of the album. But yeah, it's Zappa is musically, he's definitely brilliant. So we now got our 17th album. It's by Lucio Battistizzi. I think I might have pronounced that wrong. Anima Latina. So once again, we got a change in mood. And this is the second of 3 non-English albums on my list. So because I'm a lyrics guy, sometimes there's a disconnect if I don't understand the lyrics. And also, I don't find read and translate lyrics to be the exact same thing. But if I emotionally connect to the music and I'm made to believe what the singer is singing, then the importance of the lyrics don't matter quite as much. So this album by the Italian singer-songwriter, it's really majestic, and he successfully creates these dreamy soundscapes. So maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but there's elements of this that almost sound like trip hop. And musically, it just seems to be ahead of its time. But yeah, it was a really cool listening experience. So we got number 16 and 15. So both of these albums are by Sparks. So number 16, Kimono My House, And number 15, propaganda. So I'm basically mentioning these two together because I love both of these albums. And it's kind of a coin toss of which one I like better. But both of these albums are fine showcase of Russell and Ron Mael quirky brilliance. So both brothers, they add their own unique elements to the tune. Like for example, Russell's vocal blend. I read one review that compared it to Mark Bolan and Tiny Tim. So I'm pretty sure that was meant as a compliment, and I would take it as a compliment. That was an apt description. But then there's also Ron's work as a skilled composer who writes these intricate and innovative musical arrangements, and he comes up with these really clever lyrics. So yes, both of these albums represent the band at the creative peak. And I would also consider these two albums to be ahead of their time. You really can hear the influence on different forms of indie and alternative music. So album number 14 is by The Residents, Meet the Residents. So this could be potentially one of the more divisive albums on the list. So it's one of those albums that people are probably gonna love or hate. I mean, I guess potentially there could be a middle ground of those who are just puzzled and confused and they're wondering, what did I just listen to? But I think in most cases, you're gonna love or hate this. But quite often with outsider music, artists break musical convention because they don't know any better. And there's a certain sincerity and genuineness to that. But in the case of The Residents, you get a sense that they know what rules they are breaking and they know why they are breaking them. So this really is meant to be challenging and subversive. So it opens with a deconstruction of these boots are made for rocking, and this recreates an ominous, almost apocalyptic feel. So I realize this album's not for everyone, but personally, I connect with it and I find the album to be really compelling. So, album number 13 by Betty Davis, They Say I'm Different. So, 1974 was a really good year for funk. And this album is a prime example of how I like my funk. Like the groove is gritty and edgy. I also love the crazy, badass vocal delivery of Betty. Like he just comes across as someone that has this attitude, and I wouldn't want to mess with her. And at times, the album might be kind of raunchy. Like it's probably a contender for the most raunchy album of the year. So you can discuss amongst yourself whether or not that's good or bad. But overall, this is just a really cool, funky album. And I really dig this album. So number 12, we got by Funkadelic, Standing on the Verge of Getting It On. So this is another funk album. And this album is also considered a really cool album because it is genre bending. Like I don't know if it's a controversial statement or not, but this is probably my favorite hard rock album of 74. Like at times it gets really heavy, and that's mainly because of the epic guitar solo of Eddie Hazel. Like he's a fantastic guitarist. Like I said, a lot of times, like when he like starts soloing on the guitar, it rivals any heavy metal rock guitarist. So this seriously might be one of my all-time favorite guitar albums. But also with the possible exception of Jimmy's Got a Little Bitch in Him, which challenges the homophobia of the day. The album doesn't contain the political messaging of some of the other albums, and the lyrics do take a backseat to the grooves. But when the album grooves this hard, who cares? Like this is just a very infectious album that it's hard to really kind of not want to like just shake your ass to and just really get into. So we got album number 11 by Gene Clark, No Other. So at the time the album was released, it was considered a commercial disappointment. And I can kind of see why. From the perspective of a record exec who only sees dollar signs, you can see how they would be a little bit confused. Like, how do we market this thing? It didn't really fit in with the James Taylor singer-songwriter vibe of the time. And it's country adjacent, but it didn't really fit in with what was happening within the mainstream country scene. And it also contains elements of Southern rock, soul, and gospel, but not enough to be fully embraced by any of those demographics. And then there's also that whole thing of where's the hit? There's not much in the way of catchy choruses, and there really isn't much in the way of any hooks. But the reason why it flopped at the time, I think it's also the same reason why it's now held in such high regard. Because Clark, he effectively blends different genres and he refuses to chase trends. And I think because of that, it creates a timeless sound that really transcends any genres or time period. Also, with the lush musical arrangements and poetic lyrics that can't just be reduced to hooks and choruses, I think this really creates an album that stands out as a unique and immersive listening experience. So we're now entering into our top 10. So this album's by Bob Marley and the Wailers, Natty Dread. So even though I'm not sure this would make my list of top 5 Bob Marley albums, it is a fantastic album and it's an excellent showcase of all the things that Marley does well. It has the irresistible grooves of plenty. It has the slow bedroom jams. And it also has the spiritual tunes and of course the hearted and political tunes. So each of these things you could argue he does better on other albums, but this might be his most balanced album. So I would describe this as an excellent starter platter. So we'll now get into the number 9 album by Gordon Lightfoot, Sundown. So at times, easy listening is used in a derogatory way. And there was a time when I was younger, I kind of viewed like songs and albums that are labeled as easy listening. It's kind of like my parents' music or even worse, grandparents' music. But my views have evolved, and Lightfoot is easy listening in the best possible way. The album has a really cool, chill out vibe to it, and there's something about the music that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. But I also really appreciate how, despite the laid back vibe of the music, there's a depth to the lyrics, and at times there's even a sense of darkness. So I love the juxtaposition in there. And I also love Gould's vocal. Also, my favorite song on the album, which I don't want to spoil because will be on my song list. It may or may not be the title track. But yeah, this song, it has a certain badassness to it. But I'll talk about that a bit more when we get to the 25 song list. But I just really love the album, and I really don't know what else to say about it. So we now got number 8 by Dadawa, Peace and Love. So this is my favorite reggae album of 1974, and this is a really cool new discovery. He also released 2 other albums in 74 under the name Raz Michael and the Sons of Negus. So those 2 albums are a bit more stripped down, and they feature a bit more of the communal drumming and chanting, but they are also worth checking out. This album features 4 songs in the course of 38 minutes, and it almost works as a suite. So I'm not 100% sure if that was the intent, but it does seem to be one of those albums where you're going to get the full experience, listen to it in its entirety. So even though it's well received on Rate Your Music, there isn't too much info online, but it is like a really cool listening experience. It's not quite as stripped down as the other 2 albums he released, but it still features those elements of African drumming and those musical elements. It just creates an hypnotic vibe. And there's also this like really spiritual listening experience. But even if you're not into the spirituality aspect of it, I think it's still this music that you can still really potentially vibe with. So, like I said, this is one of my favorite new discoveries. So we'll now get into number 7 by Gil Scott Heron and Brian Jackson, Winter in America. So this is the first official collaboration between Gil Scott Heron and Brian Jackson. So Gil looks after the lyrics and vocals, while Jackson looks after the music. So Jackson, he definitely deserves his billing, and his contribution should not be minimized. Like he creates the perfect canvas for Gil to work with. So the album's a bit of a departure for Gil because it features less spoken word and proto rapping. I'd say the only straight up proto rap tune is the explicitly political H2O Gate or H2O Gate Blues. But thankfully, he has a smooth, soulful singing voice which knows how to emote and convey the message of the song. And also on a couple of tunes, he sings with a lyrical flow, which you could possibly describe as a rap sing hybrid. So I think you could definitely see the influence there on modern hip hop. But of course, when we're talking about Gil Scott Heron, the main reason to listen to him is the lyrics and his considerable gifts as a social commentator are on fine display. So we'll now get into number 6 by Joni Mitchell and the LA Express, Miles of Aisles. So this is a live album. And when doing a list like this, there's always the debate of whether or not to include live albums, because it can come across as a bit of a cheat. Like it's kind of like or at least it can be like a greatest hits live. And this album, it definitely features many of Joni's hits, but the work of the jazz fusion band LA Express adds a different dynamic to several of the tunes. So, in a sense, they become their own standalone versions. But there's also a stripped down solo portion of the live set that's also lovely. And then it also features a couple of previously unreleased tunes, so that's cool as well. And also, as a bit of trivia, the live version of Big Yellow Taxi off the album, this was actually a bigger US chart hit than the studio version. But another thing I appreciate about the live album, because I love Joni, but sometimes there's that perception that she takes herself too seriously. But with this album, it has that playful interplay with the audience. So you can really tell she was enjoying herself. So that's a different dynamic than what you would get with the studio albums. So overall, this is a fine showcase for Joni's artistic brilliance. So album number 5 by Leonard Cohen, New Skin for the Old Ceremony. So back in high school, I had to do a independent study unit on a poet. So initially I was thinking either Chuck D or KLS1, but the teacher vetoed both. Then I was thinking Bob Dylan, but once again, no, because it's primarily considered a songwriter. Then I was thinking T.S. Eliot, who I knew nothing about, but I knew that Dylan cited him as an influence and made reference to him in his lyrics. But another student already picked T.S. Eliot. But then the teacher suggested Leonard Cohen. And the reason why Leonard Cohen wasn't vetoed is because he got his start as a published poet. And then the teacher also suggested that as part of the unit, I do a comparative study on Leonard Cohen's Closing Time, contrasting it with T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. So this was really fascinating stuff and a lot of parallels. But I am getting off topic because Closing Time isn't on this album, but Chelsea Hotel is. And through my research, I learned that the song was about Janis Joplin. But along with a song about Leonard getting freaky with Janis, the album also features provocative commentary on religion, politics, and other philosophical musings. And also, as an accomplished poet, there's very few that come even remotely close to Cohen when it comes to the quality of the lyrics. So we now got album number 4, and this will now be my first 5-star album. So it's by Oge Bad at Tabula de Esmeralda. So if you want to translate that title into English, it's the Emerald Tablet. So as mentioned previously, I just fairly recently got into MPB, but based on my limited exposure, this is the best MPB album that I love ever listened to. So even though, as I previously mentioned, I'm a lyric guy and I'm not big into looking up translated lyrics, but sometimes I do like to do a little bit of research to understand the context behind the songs. And based on that limited research, the album deals with 3 main themes: blackness, mysticism, and alchemy. Also, some of the few English lyrics on the album make reference to Jesus Christ, so there is a religious aspect there. But even if you're not into any of that, the album is just so gorgeous and majestic that it still hits on a emotional level. So just a really goddamn gorgeous album. So we now got album number 3, Big Star is the band, and Radio City is the album. And I definitely love Big Star. All three of their albums are five-star albums for me. But part of the reason why their albums commercially flop, or at least why I think they flop, is at the time that they were released, it didn't really fit in with the proggy excess of that time. So even though I already loved this album before the 1974 deep dive, listening to it as part of that deep dive, it was like a breath of fresh air for me because a lot of the rock music released in 74, it bordered on too proggy and too polished for my personal taste. So with this album and with the music of Big Star in general, there's a certain genuineness and immediacy to the music of Big Star. And the album just strikes the perfect balance between eccentric and accessible. So yes, sometimes there's quirks, but there's also legit catchy tunes. So this is basically a fine exhibit of why Big Star is considered a foundational power pop act. And you can really hear how Big Star really had an influence on modern day indie rock. So yes, I never travel far without a little Big Star. So album number 2 by Joni Mitchell, Court and Spark. So this album finds Joni starting to delve a little bit more into jazz. I mean, she did start exploring a bit of jazz on her previous album from 1972, For the Roses. And then her subsequent albums get even a bit more experimental with the jazz. But this album, it really hits the sweet spot between the singer-songwriter folkiness of earlier works and the jazz experimentation of a mid to late 70s period. So we, both camps of Joni fans, can potentially connect to this album. So this album, it's just a first-class display of Joni's genius as a musician, singer, songwriter, and producer. There's definitely a reason why she's one of the most important artists of all time. And we're now going to get to number 1 by Neil Young, On the Beach. So basically, on my top 10, there was a total of 5 Canadian albums, or 4 Canadians because Joni Mitchell had 2 albums. So yeah, 74 was a really good year for Canadian artists. But yeah, I believe I've talked about this in a previous video, so I don't want to get too off topic like I did with Leonard Cohen. But I do have a special connection with Neil Young because back in 93, it was my first concert. So it was a Neil Young Pearl Jam double bill. And at the time, I was more of a Pearl Jam fan, but seeing Neil Young live, it just blew me away and I became a convert. But one thing over the years that I appreciate about Neil is that he's an uncompromising artist who did whatever the hell he wants. Like basically commercial expectations be damned. And this particular album is the second of what is often referred to as the Ditch Trilogy. So basically, those 3 albums were in response to the massive success of his 1972 album, Harvest, and his first and only number 1 US Billboard hit, Heart of Gold. So Neil, he did not want to become complacent and repeat himself and he didn't want to take the path that was expected of him. So instead, he went with a new direction with those three albums. And each of those three albums was slightly different from the previous album. So he just, whatever Neil felt like doing, he was going to do it. But that being said, that's not to suggest that this album is totally inaccessible. The songs do stand alone and they've aged incredibly well. Like the songs all are described as very relatable because on a human level, they well express feelings of alienation, and we deal with the fight or flight response. So it's basically emotions that not only Neil was legitimately grappling with, but many, myself included, it's like very real emotions that you can connect with on the emotional level. And also, and this is something else I appreciate about Neil Young, was he wasn't afraid to speak out on social issues. And this album does feature pointed critiques on environmental issues as well. And this is something that he would explore even more directly later in his career. But yes, Neil Young, legendary artist, one of my personal favorite artists. And this album, On the Beach, classic album, and the best album of 1974. So this concludes the list. What do you think of the list? Feel free to protest the list in your comments. Let me know if any of your favorite albums are missed. And feel free to post your own list. So if you enjoyed the video and you want me to continue making them, please like and subscribe. And you can feel free to check out the website Ongoing History of Protest Songs, which really spotlights protest music, not only from the past, but protest music that's continuing to be made right up to our current time. So thanks for listening, and please stay safe.